was his teaching. And you can see the effect of that in terms of Daniel's presentation. Rodney Coates had to leave to catch a flight, and the next presenter is going to be James Fenelon. You're on.
Thank you. Since I've already said good day to you, we'll just move right into what I can present on, which is the title of this ended up being Black Nationalism Through the World System Lens, a Legacy of Rod Bush, because a lot of our work intersected because of the work we did on the political economy of the world system. And it's really almost non-treatment, of racist formulation over centuries of times, and we of Native descent like to see that as a half a millennium of development. And then it was further titled, the session was A Warrior for Justice, the Integration of Ideas and Practice. And there was also a sense of, which I thought Rodney did so well, of bringing our own interaction with Professor Bush over the years. And so I hope to be able to speak to that. Last night I put some pretty pictures together, not some pretty pictures in some cases, and one of them is of a Mayan cross with those 4 direction colors that I just mentioned before. We can think of those, in fact, work that recently we've been looking at in a variety of ways is black and red and white and yellow. And it was explained to me by an old Lakota, in fact, one of the last Heyokas, which is a person who gets power by doing things the opposite ways, that these colors emanate from a relationship, directional relationship with the earth, the 4 directions. So no color in that tradition has any more power or less power than any other color. No direction, it's non-hierarchical and it's non-linear. And so it is really a powerful way to think that also the Western world has decided that they can group peoples and then do things to them in terms of these colors and call them black and red and white. And here in California, the Yellow Peril literally argued in the halls of Congress in that way. So in this sense, focusing on that one direction, which would be west, which we often attribute black to, as I've already shared with you, I thought I'd go to the first memories, but I've given him this name, if I can, in passing, and that's Akichita Sapa Oyate. And Akichita means a warrior, but it also means warrior police, but it has a deeper meaning, and that is someone who is charged with doing the right things for people in an honorable way. And Sapa usually means black. One of the other elders that I attribute a great deal of learning on mine, so many other people's part, Mary Louise Defender, has given presentations. She said it was so strange when the Washichu doesn't mean white, it means the greedy, strong ones who keep everything for themselves. Okay, that's literally what Washichu means. Or she says, oh, it means the white man. No. She goes, we did not call peoples based on some notion of color. That was not part of the earth. That's not the way you look at the world, right? But she goes, as Chauncey Dupree said, he's at Heyoka, he said, how strange that we have these colors and this philosophy of the earth and the world in which we live, and yet this Western world that tells us it is so civilized calls people based on color, which we have no notion of. What is it? So as Mary Louise Defender says, people came in and they said, there are these people, we call them black. And so, people looked at that and said, this is very strange what you people have done, right? Nonetheless, they began to use that word. So, okay, well, then we'll call them Sapa Oyate. And that Oyate means those which go together in some way. So we can use Pete Oyate, Buffalo Nation, or we can use Wambli Oyate, and that means Eagle Nation. Those which go, those things which go together. That does not separate you from the rest of the world. It means that there's a sense that there's this kind of shared reality that goes with that. And that's Akichita Sapa Oyate. My first memories of meeting Rod in a very significant way were at an ASA, interesting enough, in San Francisco. And it was an incredibly large room, okay? And it was one of those ones, you're sitting up on this dais, and very few people came, okay? So is Rod and I sitting on up there, okay? And so we moved the discussion off the dais onto the floor and kind of made somewhat of a circle, and we engaged the group in the ideas that we came to share. And I got a flood of memories in thinking about this. I spoke to Framing Wounded Knee, 1890 to 1973. We call that Wounded Knee 1 and Wounded Knee 2. But then all the way to 1990, in the sense of 100 years of seeing the struggles of our Oyates, our nations, that which coheres together. And that the struggle was still going on, even though many of the most powerful events we referred to were in the past. Rod spoke to the creation of black nationalism in the United States with a remarkable similarity, but of course a very different story, where it was located at and the nature of the struggles. In this, we began to share a discourse on ethno-national struggles, surviving and thriving in America, although I have a tendency to share that with Kay. And now I have a set of pictures, and I will, we can post this to the website. I'd be glad to share it. And some of them are, this just went down in Brazil, and a lot of people were just presenting the Indigenous People session, and a lot of people were not even aware of that. That a number of leaders of surviving Indian nations in Brazil and peoples went to the World Cup protests, which have gotten to be quite strong, about class, along with some kind of ethnic struggle, but there it's a more fluid variety. And they went on out there and actually put on their traditional battle gear. This is not a stereotype, this is a reality, because they know they were entering a long-term millennial battle. And of course, Brazil is it's the largest number of people stolen from nations and societies from especially Western Africa and taken to Brazil. That's to be race-based slaves. It has got one of the largest sets of genocides. There's caravan trans that had like 10,000, 20,000 Guarani slaves, and they killed 40,000 to get the 20,000, right? And Brazil is just this epitome of race-based struggle in terms of empire, and it reemerged this way. So when these leaders come on out, they actually have spears, bow and arrows. They shot a couple of bow and arrows. They shot a couple of policemen in the legs because they're wearing bulletproof vests. You know, and the struggle, and it's like they're daring, you know, okay, shoot back at us. The reason why I thought it was an important, you know, picture, as you can see, and I've got quite a few more, is that it was typified as, oh, Indian people joined the World Cup struggle, right? And the struggle, you know, for class struggle in Brazil. And that's not what they were there for. They were glad to join their brothers and sisters in struggle. But they were there to tell the story of the Belo Dam, the largest dam in the world, that is just simply destroying nations and people, and one of the last great Amazonian rainforest areas that's also destroying our entire climate, all right, which Chomsky has spoken to in that way. They were there to talk about the destruction, not only of the Guarani people to the north, but all of the peoples along the Amazonian region that's ongoing to this day for gold. You know, which Crazy Horse called the yellow metal that drives the white man crazy. Okay, so in this sense, the ethno-national struggles are about, in our view of the world, native nations and the telling of our stories and our struggles from our perspective. And this is what I shared, you know, with Rod, and this is what his work was. Okay, black nationalism and the civil rights movement, the telling of the story. I studied with Alden Morris on the origins of the civil rights movement. You know, the civil rights movement emerged from black communities and black churches and black struggle, and it had been there long before, as we talk about in the American Indian movement, and it's continuing now, right? So that's where he landed his discourse. But then furthermore, into a modern world system, and so, you know, Rodney did have to leave, but he stated it so well. A modern world system and a capitalism born by and into the genocidal destruction of indigenous peoples and the massive enslavement of people stolen from societies and nations in Africa, both in the many millions. And that cannot be underscored enough, right? The modern world system and capitalism society, the great wealth of Western civilization built up in Europe, is actually built on land and labor. Land rested in genocidal constructs over native peoples and the massive enslavement. Millions and millions of people, and millions died in the Middle Passage, of course, too, in race-based enslavement. Two systems which had never been seen on that scale in world history before. Leading, furthermore, in world system analysis and black nationalism, to hegemonic dominance and the suppression of these origin stories. And that's my work, you know, the Indian and the black, and then later on, perhaps the Irish, the white, and the other, right? An origin of, wait a minute, where did the idea of the Indian come from? It's a crazy, insane, and totally racist system, right? You know, we have the Taino Arawak, where Columbus was. We have the Guarani in Brazil. We have the Great Aztecan, which was many different city-nation states, and one of the greatest cities in the world, Tenochtitlan, that's brought down by Cortez, okay? Universities, trade routes throughout the Americas, but it is the Indian, or Indio, put into the racist frame. And similar in North America, you know, we have the Lakota, the Haudenosaunee, the Timucua, and in California, the Cahuilla. We always acknowledge here it was probably primarily the Ohlone and other people, right? These nations of people just called Indian. So it's a great racial construct. And also, as we then notice, because of the destruction of our nations, the creation of the black. The black doesn't exist until you steal people in a violent process out of the societies and nations in which they existed, even if there was a very small slave system, not a market. The world system of enslavement builds the market, and that's key in a political economy of the world system analysis, right? But you don't have the black until you've taken them from them, cut the cultural ties, you know, make them so that they're not connected to those origins anymore, and then you create the so-called black slave, right? This is a massive dehumanization system that was done on such a scale, it's almost too powerful to conceive of it. It's called hegemonic dominance, and it is then seen within the framework of the black nationalism in terms of freedom struggles. In his book, We Are Not What We Seem, Black Nationalism and Class Struggle in the American Struggle. So you can look at what we call assimilation, movement throughout the class system, and see that this thing, very contested, called black nationalism, is saying, wait a minute, there is a sense of that oyate, those things which belong together, peoples with a common struggle that may line up with other struggles. And this is a civil rights movement. So in that sense, we need to recognize that the civil rights movement probably would not have succeeded, at least not as well, if there weren't other black nationalist movements going on at the same time, by any means necessary, right? And so the system, faced with this struggle, you know, says, well, let's go with this one, right? This was huge in the American Indian community. The American Indian movement, you know, which also became an armed struggle in many respects then, was related to what became the sovereignty movements, right? And the question is, do we assimilate? And assimilation is you know, in fact, people will literally say, you're assimilated. Well, we don't even know what assimilated means, right? But it does mean not to see, it includes not to see that you are of peoples, of nations in a struggle, and that to assimilate means to go on the hegemonic terms. It means to say, and this was huge in his work, right, is to say, wait a minute, I'm not describing my reality, I'm trying to get a little more equal in your reality. Okay? And that is black nationalism seen through Native nation struggles. So this leads in many ways to what I think, at least I see as somewhat of a seminal work in the title alone. So first I look at intellectualism and positive imagery. It's deep intellectualism, and this is what we've done in our Native communities. We had Vine Deloria and all these people literally say, and then Mary Louise Defender, no education whatsoever, speaks all the languages of the Dakotas, you know, in their languages, and speaks other languages, and can get on up at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., move throughout these languages and cultures and societies. Wait a minute, that is intellectualism, such as the struggle that emerged, that he talks about with the black intellectuals, you know, from Fanon and Du Bois to the contemporary perspectives, deep intellectualism. And that's very powerful, because Fanon actually comes from Martinique, as does Aimé Césaire and some of the other great leaders. So they're seeing this perspective of having been a colonized nation of people based on race, and how that moved back in a global way to other parts. Actually, race goes to Africa. It doesn't come from Africa. It goes to Africa as a creation of the Western system. And he identifies that and the ideological analysis of understanding the world system and its hegemonic ideologies versus its resistance ideologies. And so this becomes important too in merging colonialism and what is called, and I know this one native elder said, you know, post-colonialism. When did we get to that post part? And that's not this stage, you know. But merging colonialism and so-called post-colonialism thought, but maintaining a focus on the racist and supremacist thinking that created the system in the first place. Never forgetting that. And yet, somehow, being positive in seeing, right in the title of his work, an ending to the white world supremacy of global racism and historical capitalism. And that's a leap of faith of incredible order, right? So in looking at the social movement leadership that produces the change and progress in the world in which we're in today, you know, we've identified these deep traditions, these powers, these struggles, millions of people, hundreds and centuries of years, and what Rod begins to represent is both a literate justice activist that at its very core is anti-racist. And he has woven literatures together in the world systems analysis and the radical black social movement history traditions in such a way that it makes a major contribution toward understanding where we're at today and where we need to go. You know, we've been going back 30 or 40 years. We're about 30 years backwards now in terms of the segregation indices, right? We've been quietly inching backwards, right? Has that been happening also in our understanding of the nature of these struggles? Some of my greatest regrets were not responding to, or at least being able to respond to, the generous and thoughtful invitations of Professor Rod Bush to engage with the many radical and social justice organizations and conferences which he was engaged with, and always saying, come join me at this, you know, and I said, well, I don't have the time now, or whatever, and, you know, and then you realize that the man was as much involvement of social change as he possibly could be. It is a testimony to the social activism and deep commitment that he has that I speak to that. So I have a picture from Standing Rock College where we have in the Tanshan, a chieftain feather leadership, that's Mary Louise Fenton, and other people said, those feathers were given not because you were a warrior, it's not a killing, you know, although sometimes that might be recognized. Those were for civic leadership, for leading the people in terms, as one of his students has just pointed on out, when you might pay a cost. You did pay a cost, right? So then you were given one of these eagle feathers. When you had enough of them, you could actually wear that bonnet. So in going global, he took on the white supremacists, literally the end of white world supremacy, and it's a totally radical title, right? It's one thing to look at world supremacy in relationship to hegemonic dominance. Another thing to call it white world supremacy. The dominant society does not like it to be called that. And then more importantly, black internationalism and the problem of the color line. So what he did is he took us to this point where we see that, and Fredrickson and all these other people have done this another way, this relationship of the 20th century language. Du Bois was one of the few people that pointed us toward that, right? And said it'll be the problem of the color line, that the emergence from Jim Crow South, the borrowing of the Nazi regime from the Jim Crow South, and then from that, the further borrowing of apartheid South Africa is a global phenomena that was actually attacking the very notion of black nationalism and intellectualism at its very essence and core, and one which we as indigenous and nations and people share with them. So, in ending, in honoring of a passing way too soon, the Gaelic way, because I'm as much Irish as I am Indian, to recognize such a passing is through a wake that originates the awakening, the remembering the man and the spirit. In the Lakota Sioux way is to recognize a spiritual journey to the earth, returning to the earth, and also to the Milky Way, to the cosmos, the spirit. And in that we say Pilamaya, which is thank you for being an Ikichita, a warrior for the people. And we say Wopila, honor to you for your good deeds in honor of what you've done. Rod Bush, Pilamaya, and Wopila. Thank you.
The video is looking like.
Well, thank Jim for that excellent presentation. Now we're going to have a video presentation, and then following that will be Melanie will make some comments.
Alan is.
Oh, Al?
Well, how,
Oh, Al? Okay, you're on.
so
Okay.
how are you, Mom?
I also have some things to
Okay.
say.
Okay, so
Try it.
I
no,
got,
this one will work. This is
Oh, okay.
YouTube.
So just want to turn it around?
Yeah, that's the best. That's all I can do right now. I meant the one that's just the video itself is
think that's
broken.
gonna
So, all right. Let's see.
the sound is.
I've got 2 sets of speakers, so it should be okay.
Okay, all right.
Let's let me crank them though. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
Okay.
One. Okay. Let's see how much volume I can get out of this.
The whole one isn't working.
It goes to a PDF file of the program.
I wonder if we should skip it.
Do you want to skip it? It's up to you.
Try it once.
Or I'll see how good the quality is. I'm on the public internet, so we'll see how that goes.
I think I had a unique experience knowing how to push, at least at school.
Sound quality's pretty bad.
Painfully obvious that someone else was listening, and every word's back. And I really appreciate
I'll put one speaker.
because
Can't hear it.
Yeah, that's because it's the room sound.
There's a video montage of students that's on the rodbush.org website, so you can actually look at it. And it's a beautiful statements about their experience. Just go back slightly. It's just like a 5-minute video, but for some reason the link is not.
Yeah, the link on the
not
actual
accessed.
page is dead, so.
Try to, one more, and then if it doesn't work, then,
All right, let me try this one instead of this one. Maybe this speaker's clearer, but I doubt it.
his way of being, his way of speaking, it was really like coming into a conversation where 2 people were meeting rather than one person having to reach across. Any problems that I've had, like I can go to his office, if I had problems with the paper, he would just sit there and inspire me to know that I can still do my best. Even though my writing isn't always the best, he was always there to tell me that I'm doing what I need to do to succeed, and I just never had that.
It was actually in the last course that he took.
Okay. Okay, I guess we're gonna forego the video. I was mistaken before. I got confused between the two sessions. So Howard is gonna speak, and then after Howie is Alan Spector. So Howard, why not? You're on.
Good morning. Great pleasure to be here. Honored to have a chance to say something very brief about Rod Bush. Of course, I was very shocked to hear of his passing. Rod and I were about the same age, and it leaves his loss leaves tremendous sorrow for all of those who knew him, among all of those who knew him and worked with him. I knew him primarily as a racial theorist and as a prominent black Marxist scholar. We really never had a chance to become close, but I always thought we could have been, really could have been great friends if opportunity, circumstances had allowed. We crossed paths at San Francisco, here in San Francisco. Must have been the late 70s, maybe early 80s. But we were only slightly in touch then, and we were both anti-racist activists in the city. And later I reconnected with him really through Melanie. And through his work, of course. I was really influenced, greatly influenced by We're Not What We've Seen, which I still see as a very important work on black nationalism and its deep connections to class struggle, a synthesis, an analysis that draws these two currents into comparative examination. Rod exemplified movement scholarship. His teaching has been highly praised by his students. He was a tremendous influence on many young people. We've heard a lot about that. His research, his writing were always politically engaged in the best sense. What I mean is that he was never a mere polemicist. Instead, he was drawn to the study of problems that were faced by social justice activists, and indeed by revolutionaries, mainly in the United States, but also elsewhere. Rod saw himself this way, as a radical, someone committed to the black community, and to black power, and as a socialist who fought against the exploitation of working and poor people, and as an intellectual who worked for the strength, the unity, and the understanding among and of all oppressed people. So Rod exemplified a certain kind of revolutionary practice that we can all learn from, that we have learned from, and we can continue to learn from. As an activist, as a teacher, as a scholar, as a comrade, as a friend, he made a tremendous contribution. We will miss you, Brother Roderick Daniels. I'm sorry, Roderick Douglas Bush will carry on in your name. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Alan Spector, Purdue, right? Okay.
Little Purdue.
Little Purdue.
Yes, I was like scouring the 50 emails I get every day from the university, you know, on my university email, the water fountain in the building C is not working, all that stuff. And and one came across from Bob Newby. He said, well, you know, we'd like you to come to San Francisco and make some comments about Rod. I was thinking, before I got the email, I'm not going to San Francisco this year. I have to mortgage my house and sell my son into bondage. This is like the most expensive city in the universe. Seriously, I mean, but you know, an email from Bob, and it's about Rod. It's hard to say no. And then he sends a follow-up email and says, well, Melanie would really be happy for you to be there. And I'm thinking, who am I exactly? I mean, you know, compared to Rob, I mean, I'm more of an activist, I guess, than a scholar. I don't really run in these circles that much. I've written some things, but I really felt like humbled, actually, to be put in that milieu. Sort of interesting, you know, because when you're young, just starting out, you come to ASA all wide-eyed. All wide-eyed. And then you hear some of the superstars speak, and you say, is that it? Really? That's it? sort of watered down, extremely diluted Weberianism posing as Marxism, and taking out some hankies and crying like a bunch of missionaries for the poor, but not really grasping, not having